behind the viewers at home, but also recording them. So that means that what I would ask you, because the microphone is just over here, maybe minimize throwing your bottles on the floor or that sort of stuff. These meetups, for those of you just to get a reading of the room, for whom is this the first DBT meetup? Raise your hands. Excellent. This is good. We're reaching new audiences. It's fantastic. These meetups are quite informal, as you know. So you've got some pizza, you've got some drinks. We're going to do 3 talks. Each of them are half an hour, 20-minute talk, and then we really want a nice discussion. So when someone is talking, already think about your questions and make sure that you ask them straight afterwards. Typically, these discussions, they sort of slowly start spinning up like a good diesel engine, and then luckily Orange Valley has provided some nice beers and Dutch treats afterwards that we can continue doing with. But the more discussion we have over here, the better. Speaking about Orange Valley and Ice Park, thank you so much for hosting us here tonight. These meetups, they are based on volunteering, on the community of DBT. We are very much dependent on kind companies and organizations to host us and to be there for us. So with that in mind, I'm just going to give Anouk 30 seconds to give a short introduction to Orange Valley and what to do over here. And then I'm going to introduce our first speaker. All right, Anouk.
All right. Well, thank you all for being here today in Breukelen at Orange Valley. We're very honored to have the 4th edition of the DBT Meetup, the first edition for Orange Valley ourselves. Short introduction about Orange Valley. We're a data-driven digital agency. So we're focusing mainly on combining marketing data and technique together. And for the more data science-related projects, we work together with Ice Park. So yeah, we just want to have a great evening, and let's share some knowledge together. That's also something that we do as an agency quite often, and which we also stimulate. So that's why we would love to contribute also to events like the DBT community. So yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Now, long empirical studies have surfaced that these ideas, the sort of dissemination of knowledge and discussions go better with beer. So afterwards, we've got some beers to sort of do that with. All right, before we go further, Tony is our first speaker. Tony is here to talk about tackling data depth in the DBT environment. So actually, without further ado, Tony, please over to you.
Thanks, Sal, for having me over. So today we're going to be talking about tackling data tech depth. So you might be wondering who's in front of you. I'm just going to give you 3 bullets. So I'm an independent data engineering consultant. I've been working for 5 years in the field, across the fields of life sciences and healthcare. I've worked on projects of several thousands and 6-figure columns, and I've been through very early stages of fast-growing startups as well as later stage enterprise solutions. So I've seen quite a large spectrum of data quality issue. So first of all, why is data quality relevant? So I don't know how many of you have been watching Coalesce this year, but this figure definitely caught my attention. So we can see here on the y-axis the amount of DBT projects, on the x-axis the amount of time, and we have the different sizes of DBT projects. And obviously you can see it's been increasing exponentially, but also the average size of a DBT project has also been increasing quite significantly. And the first thing that I'm thinking when I see a graph like this is, what's the error rate increasing, right? Because if you're going to have so many more models, even a 5% error rate is going to show up in your data. Second thing, if we take a look at some of the surveys done of the state of data in 2023, we can see that although there's a couple options in the data quality and observability space, when people are surveyed, across the globe in different, let's say, years of experience, we can see that most of them have heard of some of these tools, but when you look at the little green bar, not a lot of them use it consistently and prod. So we're kind of early in data quality and observability tooling space. And the reason for that, I think, is simple. The data quality is quite complicated. you think about something like an ETL connector or a service like Fivetran, it's kind of straightforward what you want. I want data from source A to source B in a table form, but data quality is a bit more complicated. What is your standard? What are the metrics you even care about? Do we care about data privacy as we do, for example, in healthcare and finance? Who's responsible? What are the systems that we want to take care of? Do we want it real time? Do we want it every day? There's all these different questions. And what I've seen a lot in the space is a lot of the data quality and observability tooling will just put everything in one giant platform and then ask you 100,000 a year, which obviously is not a solution for everybody. So this really requires us to do more effort on our side. Now, I'm going to start with this. So in general, DBT is pretty good at configuration management. So whatever configuration you define, you can rest assured it's going to properly be represented in your project when you're small. If you have good CI/CD practices, that's going to help a ton with increasing the quality of your overall data warehouse and DBT project. However, with sufficient time and scale, there's some issues that occur, right? So first of all, your current conventions may be often older models. So what I typically see happen is, a team might pick up DBT, they'll start building some models, and then after a year they decide, this is our new standard. Let's start making models this way going forward. And then another discussion happens after a year, and then another. And you'll just end up having a DBT project with all kinds of standards in your models. So that's complicated to work with. You see a lot of column discrepancies, right? So if you have, thousands of tables in your data warehouse, if you don't specifically check your configurations, they might be quite off from the actual prod state. With large projects, changing standards can become quite time-consuming if you don't have the tooling for this. So if let's say you have 100,000 columns in your database, and you want to have a different naming convention for certain data types, good luck deploying that. That's going to take time. Observability of state becomes difficult because we have all these dispersed YAML files for these properties or schema files. They're kind of changing the naming of this a little bit within DBT. And last but not least, CI/CD gets kind of slow when you're large. If you have a data warehouse that takes 200 models to pre-build before you get to yours, if I do a test and staging, it might take 20 or 30 minutes before I see a little configuration mistake. That's going to cost a lot of time if you multiply this over 10 or 20 developers. So really, what this leads to that, the managing and the fixing of all these YAMLs across the data warehouse becomes a huge burden on engineering hours, or more commonly, it's just skipped altogether. So I really want to focus on how can we create a centralized DBT project standard. And the best way to think about that is we want to increase the data quality of the DBT artifacts. Now, if you don't know what these are, whenever you run commands like dbt run or dbt builds, you'll get some of these metadata files generated in the background. This is a JSON representation, so you can see here the manifest with some metadata, and we see here some notes where we can see how different seeds are configured. This is an example from Facebook's DBT repo. And I really want to focus on 4 things to improve the quality of these artifacts. So first of all, we have observability fixtures, and I will explain later what these are. We can build some state checks. We're going to talk about DBT, YAML, JSON schemas, and finally, how we can tie some of these concepts together to create a improved dev experience. Now, first of all, this is a very nice feature that DBT has introduced about 6 months ago, and that's the DBT runner. So we can see we're actually importing it right here. And what the DBT runner is basically a early Python interface to DBT. They're still working on creating a more extensive Python API for working with DBT internally, but this is here for the time being. And what you can see we can just initialize a runner. We can say we want to run dbt parse, and we can then parse out the results, which is a manifest, which is actually an internal Python object used by dbt itself in the background. And of course, we catch any errors here if they happen. So this is what the data class looks like in parts. It's actually much larger than this. And you can see there's a ton of data in here, right? We see all these different components that actually compose to the manifest object, and they all have their own data classes. And we can work with this, right? We can parse out things like the nodes, the sources, and the files. In the files, we'll have things like the YAML files. And this can be really easy. So let's say we saw the first bit of code. It's if you want to parse out the models, we just take a look at the nodes, and then we just parse out the items, and that's as simple as it is. We create a dictionary where we have a key, which is the model name, and then the value is, let's say, a data class representation of the configuration based on the manifest. We can do the same for YAML files. We can take a look at the list of YAML files and then just filter for any YAML file in there. And we can combine them too, right? So we can take the dbt models and the YAMLs, and we can combine them together into representation together. So in this case, we would be dealing with data where the key is the model and the value is the YAML configuration of that model. Differently, we can also set this up for a warehouse. So this is for Snowflake. It's doing something very hacky, running a macro and then parsing out the result as a pandas data frame. But there's stuff in there as the table name, the column names, whatever you really want from there. Now, this is what the data might look like, right? So we have, for example, here the models that we parsed out. So you can see here, again, like the model name and some information about it based on the configuration. Some of these are within the SQL file. Some of these are within the YAML file. So these are within the product YAML. But more interestingly, we have this other representation of, let's say the models to YAML mapping, and then we can see actually we have the model name, and then we have the full YAML configuration of the dbt YAML file. So, for example, if you want to merge these sources, we can use the model name as a primary key. And there's a lot of things you can start thinking about modeling the dbt metadata as we speak. But this can be very powerful. For example, we can set up PyTest fixtures. So fixture really is just a set of steps that prepare data for a PyTest. And we can just create the manifest, the models, the sources, the YAMLs, the model YAML mappings. And then we can do things like this. So this might be a bit much code, but essentially what we're doing here is we're taking the data from Snowflake and we're taking data from the manifest, and we're actually checking what columns that we have in prod in Snowflake are defined in the YAML file, and we get an output like this. So you might have model A has 68 out of 69 columns defined in the YAML. Model B might have 194 out of 201, etc., etc. And we can, of course, create a list of which models are missing. This can be, of course, quite useful when an analyst is working in this, and they can just run the test and see, hey, I actually missed some columns when they're testing and staging. Second thing I want to talk about is the JSON schema. So this is not the actual dbt JSON schema. It's much larger in reality. It's too large to put on a slide. But I just wanted to show an example JSON schema. So JSON schema really is a JSON representation of the schema of another JSON file, if that makes sense. You can find the dbt ones in these two different places. And the nice thing about these schemas is that you can add additional requirements on top of the regular dbt YAML requirements. So, let's say I want to make sure that everybody always has descriptions, or they always must include certain keys. If somebody's including a certain metadata field, it should always have certain values. And the cool thing with this is if you combine it with formatter, you get something like this. So this is in VS Code. I'm editing a file, and I can actually see, hey, I'm missing a sensitivity key in my masking meta keys, which is something we define as a standard internally. You can go quite far with this. Now here's another example. You can also, of course, just parse the YAMLs directly, and then just with Python edit the YAML file in real time. So what we're doing here is, it's a bit much code, but what's basically happening is we're taking the model YAML representations, and then we're taking out the meta fields, and then we're checking, have we defined the meta fields where we need to, and we make sure that there's a specific order of keys. So this is also another way you can do this, right? You can just build a script that will format any YAML that you want to format, and it's quite straightforward. Now, lastly, I want to talk about the dev experience. So typically, when we're growing DBT project, we see something like this happen. At the start, you can really focus on delivering value most of the time. Let's say you have a project of 10 or 100 models. Don't need to worry as much about the management overhead of that, right? You can just focus on getting the data to the stakeholders as quickly as possible. But of course, once you grow really large, you have to put in more time. And what typically tends to happen is that you're setting up analytics engineers or data engineers or whoever's working on these things with a lot of overhead. They have to think about all these conventions, like how should I name my models? Should I always include this or that? And then there's a review session. Somebody else looking at, did you do all these things? It takes a lot of time. And what I want to do is take some of that burden away. So here's how we can do that. So I'm calling this kind of the local dev layers of defense, because we're not really talking about CI/CD. You might run on something like GitHub Actions to check things in dev or production. So first of all, you can standardize a development environment with something like VS Code dev containers or GitHub code spaces. So these are basically container services that can allow you to define the interactive development environment for everybody on your team. So you can preset it with tools and configurations and take away the setup time for new people on your team. You can add things to pre-commit, and you can take some existing tools like DBT checkpoints. This is actually a very nice package that allows you to set up some pre-commit steps and check for things like have you actually defined a model YAML for your model, right? So some of these standard tests are actually already in there. You can also take a look at SQL Bluff and GitHub. They also have very good pre-commit steps. But also you can build your own, right? With this PyTest construct, you can simply just add a pre-commit step that runs your own test, which is actually quite useful. So formatting, we showed a little bit of that. You can use SQL Bluff, Prettier, YAML. YAML was the tool that I used for the highlighting in VS Code. But of course, you can do a custom formatter as well. Something that I'm very interested in is the writing of YAML files. So let's say you have a custom JSON schema and a custom formatter, and you need a template, right? You have things like DBT utils, but you might want to have a little bit more based on your own project. But what you can also do is update existing files. So we have actually built some things internally where, let's say somebody runs the DBT LS and it just selects upstream and downstream models of some model. And then you can just say, I want to edit this meta tag for all these model YAMLs just with one command. And you can build something like that quite easily with some of the constructs we've shown in this presentation. Something quite advanced that I'm still looking into is interjecting with a custom DBT runner. So you can actually take that DBT runner and change the way commands are performed when somebody performs command line arguments. So let's say somebody runs a DBT build. You could have like a custom code that will then, fetch the information schema data from Snowflake after the model has been built, and it will give you a notification in your terminal like, hey, you've missed these in your configuration, which is kind of cool. That's definitely not part of the standard experience. And other things you can do is also generate observability reports. So some tools that I've liked in this space is Elementary, Monte Carlo, Great Expectations. Very good documentation on how to use these. But again, you can also build your own custom observability reports with some of these toolings. And really, this is like the layers of defense that you introduce that help you to really reduce the chance of mistake, but also reduce the amount of time it takes to write something properly. So, with dev setup, you remove any setup issues that somebody might have when they're joining the team. With pre-commit, you can control how are people committing to version control, either during a commit or during a push. I see now I actually have double text there. Performancing, I would say this helps you with actually defining the right keys where you need to. With bulk writing, you can just say like, hey, we want to migrate to this new standard, and just do it in a week instead of months. You can interactively view results of DBT commands, of a custom DBT runner. And of course, with observability reports, people can see what is the impact of my changes of data in staging before they actually push it to prod. And that's it. So if you want to get some references on the source file, or if you want to connect for networking purposes, talk about this topic, or any business inquiries, I have an independent consultant. You can reach out to me on LinkedIn or email, and I'll take any questions from here.
Thank you, Tony. Thank you so much for a well-structured and precise time. My apologies, I gave him a 10-minute warning right at the moment that he went to his final slide. So good serendipity there. Any questions, Robert? We can dive into straight away. Don't be shy. Don't be shy. I think I've got a couple of questions. So I think you're being quite, open about the structures you use, and some of the tools that you use to work in DBT project. What sort of level of maturity would you sort of see this being most effective? Are you talking about this is only useful for a project with 5,000 DBT modules a day? Or is my home group project with 40 modules a day also a good context?
So, I mean, if we're talking about the context of development experience and just developing models and configurations more quickly, you can do that at any point in your DBT journey, right? I mean, if you're early on, you have to write a lot of new models, a lot of configurations, and if you can reduce the time, it saves a bunch of time at the start. Though, of course, you would need to know what you're doing, right? And if you're just learning about DBT, I wouldn't try to do something like that. But yeah, it's definitely, it gets more useful as the project size increases.
Any other questions for?
Yes. You had several points where you were like showing pre-commits, like formatting, all those things are kind of like an obvious call to action. After that, it's like SQL flat fails, then you have to go and fix formatting. It's not done automatically, or you're missing columns in the YAML, which I like that idea. It's very cool. You go and add them, and that's it. It passes again. But then on data quality, like you were mentioning, like reports on the side.
Yes.
So like, what would you say would be a nice call to action after that? Which is like, okay, you see a report.
Yes.
And then what do you do with that?
So I'm glad you asked that question. I mean, I have a very concrete example. So let's say I'm developing a model on staging, and I take some existing data, right? Maybe a month of data, and I'm trying to figure out what will be a good anomaly threshold. An observability report is perfect for that, right? If I want to check, like, what happens if I set this threshold? What happens if I set that threshold? Because a large part of data quality is also figuring out what are the tests I need to run. And then if you're going to go a bit further with anomaly detection and things like that, which elementary is very good at, what is going to be the time frame I'm going to look at? What do I consider an anomaly? So for things like that, it helps.
Another question, yes.
You introduce a lot of extra tests and checks. How do you also manage the amount of things someone has to adhere to when working in the project? Because maybe you take away a lot of autonomy from someone that used to write their own stuff, and now it's a very fixed way of doing things. How do you manage the
All right, this is always a balance. This depends on the company and like the goals when it comes to the standard. You don't want this to be too strict. I agree with you. You don't want to have every single thing become a problem, because then it's the other way, right? It's so over restrictive that you're spending too much time with that. But for some basic things that matter for your company, it's good to do, right? So, let's say you have something silly like a naming convention of your YAML files based on the schema. Like, people forget it all the time, and it's just a waste of time to like have them remember that or have a reviewer point that out. Something like that is perfect to automate, but yeah, you don't have to.
Sure. Any other questions for Tony? Oh, fantastic. Thank you so much. That was very, very nice. I hope we all get better at tackling data sets. We're just going to take 1 minute to get Jeroen set up. So grab another slice of pizza, grab another glass of water. We'll start again in 30, 40 seconds. So we have to be quick. Oh, that's